Hello, friends. Nice to see you nice, except that I can't see you. Uh, and never mind. I'm sure you're there. So today I want to continue with my reading of Japanese studies in Britain. But before I do, I'd just like to comment on the background that I've chosen. Uh, It's a virtual background, of course. It's not the real thing, but it is as if I were speaking to you from my college in Cambridge, which is Gonville and Caius College, or normally known as Caius College, spelt Caius. And if I tilt my head to one way or the other, let's go this way, shall we? You can see the Gate of Honor, which is one of the best features of the college's architecture. It's the gate through which people go when they want to go to the Senate House to graduate, and the Senate House is that building. No, wrong way around. That way. That building up there to my right, isn't it? Is the Senate House, and then behind the Gate of Honor, you can probably just see it if I'll tilt my head once more. You can see part of King's College Chapel, and over on that side, no, which side is that? That side, yes, um, is what is now the King's College Library. In my day, it was actually the Squire Law Library. So I studied law for 2 years. I studied French and German for a year and law for 2 years in part two. And I used to spend quite a lot of time in the Squire Law Library, as it then was. And now it's been taken over by the college, Gonville and Caius College, founded 1348 by Edmund Gonville, and again later by John Keyes. All right, that's why it's got two founders. So anyway, that's enough about all that, I think. And why have I got this background today? Well, today's topic is strongly related to Cambridge University. So let me find the text that I want to read from. There you are, I think. So we've got the contents of the book. And so far, we have read the history section, or I have read the history section. Um, uh, Chapter one. Now, there are lots of pronunciation issues about people's names, or lots of them. I won't say lots of them, but there are. It does seem to crop up quite a lot how to pronounce people's family names. And Peter Kornitski or Kornicki. Both are, I think, possible. Um, a colleague of his, a long-time colleague, former colleague of his, tells me it was Kornicki, which of course is closer to the Polish original, because it's a Polish name originally. And yet, if an American without Polish background were to look at that name, I'm sure they would read it Kornicki. And I'm sure that from what I remember of a recent appearance or fairly recent appearance on Informasia when Peter was talking about his book on code breakers and what have you. Uh, uh, he was introduced as Peter Kornicki, and I think everybody was happy with that, including him, or at least he didn't make a comment on it. So perhaps it doesn't really matter. Um, Perhaps you pay your money, you pays your money, and you takes your choice. I'm not quite sure. Um, Anyway, in terms of the scholarship, it's certainly the material that we're dealing with, it really doesn't matter. Um, anyway, uh, so there was one more like that in Hamish Ion's chapter where it was I wasn't sure if it was Poles or Powles, as Powles. Uh, but and we've got another one coming up in this chapter 4, Japanese Studies at Universities, Part 2, Japanese Studies at Universities, Cambridge University. I thought that the name Keedle was pronounced with a soft C, but in fact, I'm told it's a hard C. So I would have got that wrong. Hopefully, I won't get it wrong when we actually read it now. So here we go. Today it's Cambridge University, Japanese Studies at Cambridge University, by Professor Richard Bowring, who is a Professor Emeritus. And in fact, I think we will find his biography if we just keep. Oh, there we are. There it is. In detail. So let's read that, shall we? Probably easier than me making a mess of guessing things. Richard Bowring is Emeritus Professor of Japanese at the University of Cambridge. He taught in Australia, Monash, and the United States, Columbia and Princeton, before moving to Cambridge in 1984. He was the Foundation Professor of Japanese from 1985 to 2012 and was also Master of Selwyn College 2000 to 2013. Amongst his many publications are Murasaki Shikibu, Her Diary and Poetic Memoirs, 1982, Murasaki Shikibu, The Tale of Genji, 1988, and The Religious Traditions of Japan, 500 to 1600, 2005. And he co-edited The Myote Dialogues, A Japanese Christian Critique of Native Traditions, 2015, and other works. All right. So if we just keep searching for the name Bowring in the search box, we've got Sir John Bowring, but that's irrelevant here. So here we are. We've got to the beginning of chapter 4, and we can make the box disappear. And I'll just get myself ready to read. So, are you sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin. Cambridge University, Chapter 4, Cambridge University, Richard Bowring, the first 40 years. When the study of Japan and Japanese finally came to be introduced at Cambridge in 1948, it was established in what was then called the Faculty of Oriental Languages. The faculty was subsequently renamed Oriental Studies in 1955, but remained in essence devoted to the study of a wide range of languages, including Hebrew, with a prime interest in those of the Middle East and India. The common thread was an interest in philology and religion that ultimately went back to colonial and imperialist times. The Regius Professorship in Hebrew was founded in the time of King Henry VIII, and the first chair in Arabic had been established in the 1660s. There were also chairs for Sanskrit and Egyptology, while the chair in Chinese dates from 1888. Japanese was a newcomer and had been added not because of student demand, but as a matter of strategic priority. Nevertheless, faculty politics ensured that it remained a minority subject for many years. As late as the 1970s, it was considered more important to fight for the retention of a post in ancient Iranian than to create a new one in modern Japanese history. Oh, by the way, I have the author's permission to read this, I should say, and hopefully his blessing. All right, so we've got a footnote here. Number 1, the Faculty of Oriental Languages. For a more substantial account of the period 1947 to 97, see Richard Bowring edited 50 Years of Japanese at Cambridge, Faculty of Oriental Studies, University of Cambridge, 1998, which can be downloaded at that URL. I did so about a day ago, so it's still active. Good. Let's move on to the next page, page 74. The first lecturer in Japanese was Eric Keedle, who was appointed in October 1947. By 1948, he had persuaded the university authorities to agree to the establishment of Japanese as a subject which could lead to a BA degree. By the way, if you're only listening, it's spelt Ceadel, Keedle. Okay. He had graduated in 1941 with first-class honours in classics and had published 3 articles on metrical problems in Greek tragedy in the Classical Quarterly while still an undergraduate. Remarkable. In January 1942, he was posted to the inter-service course in Japanese held at Bedford and was made an instructor there in November 1942, a position that he held until October 1945. 20 years later, in 1967, he resigned his post as lecturer in Japanese in order to take up the post of university librarian, where he ensured that the university library had an extensive and valuable collection of Japanese books. He also devised the library's system of arranging and cataloguing its Japanese books. Whoops. He died in 1979, an early example of what is now known in Japan as karoshi, or death through overwork. His academic work in Japanese centered on the Kokinshu and its prefaces. 2 more appointments in Japanese studies were made soon after Keidel. Thenceforth, a complement of 3 lecturers was considered adequate. Given that there were few students, this is perhaps not surprising, but 3 became fixed in stone and was not altered until after 1984. One of the 2 was J.R. McEwen, known for his work on Ogyu Sorai, who taught from 1948 to 1959. The other was Donald Keene, who was a lecturer from 1949 to 1954. Columbia University in New York was prepared to offer him a longer spell of sabbatical leave in Japan than Cambridge could agree to, so he moved back to the United States and was replaced in 1955 by Carmen Blacker, who was to become famous for the Catalpa Bow, 1975, a study of shamanistic practices in Japan. In 1960, Charles Sheldon, a historian, replaced McEwen, and in 1967, Douglas Mills, a specialist in Japanese literature, replaced Keidel. We have some footnotes. We have 4 footnotes. Footnote number 2. For details of Keidel's life and achievements, see the foreword to Nozomu Hayashi and Peter Kornitski, Early Japanese Books in Cambridge University Library, Cambridge University Press, 1991, and the biographical portrait in Hugh Kortatsi, edited Britain and Japan, Biographical Portraits, Volume 5, Global Oriental, 2004. Footnote number 3, see Portrait by Peter Kornitski in Hugh Kortatsi, edited Britain and Japan, Biographical Portraits, Volume 10, Renaissance Books, 2016. That relates to J.R. McEwen, I think. Yes, that footnote. And number 4, which relates to Carmen Blacker. See Biographical Portrait by Peter Kornitski in Hugh Kortatsi, edited Britain and Japan, Biographical Portraits, Volume 7, Global Oriental, 2010. And I think this one is Douglas Mills, presumably. It says, see Biographical Portrait by Richard Bowring in Hugh Kortatsi, edited Britain and Japan, Biographical Portraits, Volume 10, Renaissance Books, 2016. So it's almost 10 years since the last Britain and Japan Biographical Portraits volume. I say the last. Will it be the last in the series? I don't know. All right, move on to the next page. Sheldon had written The Rise of the Merchant Class in Tokugawa, Japan, 1958, and Mills was later to write a collection of tales from Uji, 1970. I suppose that's Uji, south of Kyoto City, is it? I don't know. It was only after 1957 that moves were made to employ a Japanese national to teach the modern language, but the list of scholars who then arrived to carry out this task contains some illustrious figures. Itasaka Gen, 1957 to 1960, Torigoe Bunzo, 1962 to 1964, and Yamanouchi Hisaaki, 1968 to 1973, the first Japanese to be awarded a Cambridge doctorate in English literature. And I'm very privileged to know Dr. Yamanouchi, who still attends the Information online lectures that we have which are published on YouTube. The initial course of study reflected the fact that Keidel was a classicist and that Oriental languages was still closely tied to the discipline of philology. One began at or near the beginning. First-year students in 1949 started with Heian period classics such as Taketori Monogatari and Tosanikki, proceeded in the second year to the Manyoshu and Makura no Soshi, and finally had to tackle passages from the Kojiki. This in itself would be tough enough, but one of the compulsory papers in the early years was composition into classical Japanese. Wow. Gosh. From the viewpoint of a classicist, this would have been seen as quite a normal requirement. In the context of Japanese, it was bizarre. Yes, indeed. I can see why. How frightening that would have been. The speaking and reading of modern Japanese was introduced only later, and even then in somewhat haphazard fashion. It was not until 1965 to 1966 that an oral examination was introduced. The emphasis at Cambridge had initially been on classical Japanese. One reason for this had been the difficulty of finding native speakers who could teach spoken Japanese. Another was the dearth of modern Japanese books in the immediate post-war years. In a letter dated 10th of June 1947 to Captain J. Clifford, who was stationed at the time in Kuala Lumpur and was to become one of the first students at Cambridge, Eric Keidel had occasion to write as follows. I wonder if you have any contacts, official or unofficial, with anyone in Japan now who could help me get some Japanese books, mainly works of reference, dictionaries, and editions of the classics. I have tried 4 or 5 times to get some of these books by writing to people in Japan, mainly officers in the occupation forces, but with no success. If you know of any means to help me, I would be very glad. Is that the end of the page? I think it is the end. Yes, it is the end of the page. Okay, next page. Start at the top of the page. Oh dear. Keep jumping around. Copying machines were not available in those days, as one copy of each book was needed for each student. The choice of reading matter was limited. This state of affairs did not last very long, but even in 1965, when I arrived as a student, we were still using copies of handwritten material in purple ink produced on a Gestetner machine, and there was no hope of ever seeing a Japanese newspaper, let alone tasting a Japanese meal. In these early years, the 3 lecturers had only a handful of students in each year. In 1971, 10 students arrived in the faculty, but the number quickly leveled out and double figures were not reached again until the mid-1980s. By the late 1960s, Japan was well on its way to becoming a major economic power, and this did not go unnoticed in Britain at large. In accordance with the 1947 Scarborough Report, funds had become available for the development of modern Japanese studies. The School of Oriental and African Studies, SOAS, in London, expanded its provisions. Oxford University began to focus on the importance of Japan, and a new centre was opened at Sheffield, concentrating on modern Japanese studies. The University of Cambridge, with its high reputation in economics, engineering, and the sciences, as well as in core humanities subjects such as English, history, philosophy, and classics, was unfortunately slow to recognise the importance of an understanding of modern Japan and to adapt to what was happening in the wider world. The comparison to the United States and in particular Australia, where students were being introduced to Japanese at junior school level, is striking. Inevitably, when funds for higher education began to dry up, Japanese at Cambridge began to look vulnerable. The early 1980s were a time of crisis. Stringent cuts in the education budget meant that the university had to look for savings, and Oriental Studies, with its unrealistic staff-student ratio, came in for close scrutiny. In 1980, the university established a subcommittee to look into the matter. The report was produced on the assumption that overall funding for Japanese studies would not be increased. There's a footnote number 6. See separate account of Japanese studies at Sheffield by Gordon Daniels, at Oxford by Roger Goodman and Arthur Stockwin, and at SOAS by Andrew Gerstle and Alan Cummings in this volume. Page 77. By the time that the report was submitted in 1981, it had become clear that the whole financial position of the university was set to deteriorate further and in short order. Decisions on funding for the faculty were therefore postponed, but the faculty board was asked to investigate ways of increasing student intake and to take a careful look at teaching provision. The gravity of the situation was underlined by the fact that the first recommendation was that discussions take place with the equivalent board at Oxford on how certain subjects with very low student numbers might be shared out between the two universities to avoid unnecessary duplication. In particular, they asked that the future pattern of Japanese in the two universities be investigated. The situation became critical when it was announced that Oxford had received a large benefaction for Japanese studies from the Nissan car company. Unfortunately, no one in authority at Cambridge had thought about seeking funds from Japan or had tried to push the case for strengthening Japanese studies at the university. Then, as part of an attempt to reduce staff, the university encouraged teachers near the end of their tenure to take early retirement on very advantageous terms. In September 1982, both Charles Sheldon and Douglas Mills decided to accept this offer. In both cases, the decision was made for entirely understandable reasons, but the effect was to put a large question mark over the whole future of Japanese studies at Cambridge, given that the university authorities, looking for further cuts, might refuse permission to fill the posts and simply allow the subject to wither away. The result of discussions by what became known as the Joint Working Party, Oxford and Cambridge, was revealed in a further report to the university dated 16th of March 1983. On the subject of Japanese, it said, "The position of Japanese at Oxford and Cambridge presented the Joint Working Party with a particularly difficult problem. The small number of undergraduates in recent years hardly justifies on financial grounds the provision of courses at both universities. Cambridge has the larger establishment of offices supported by UGC funds, University Grants Committee, I think that is, with 3 university lectureships, two of which are now vacant." There's a footnote number 7. Cambridge University Reporter, 16th of March 1983, page 392. This footnote relates to, going back. Okay. In particular, they asked that the future pattern of Japanese in the two universities be investigated. All right. So now we just go down to the bottom again. Continue with the quotation from the report of the Joint Working Party. Yes. I think I better start this quotation again. "The position of Japanese at Oxford and Cambridge presented the Joint Working Party with a particularly difficult problem. The small number of undergraduates in recent years hardly justifies, on financial grounds, the provision of courses at both universities. Cambridge has the larger establishment of offices supported by UGC funds, with 3 university lectureships, 2 of which are now vacant, and a lectorship. Oxford has only 2 such posts, with considerably younger incumbents, but the recent establishment of the Nissan Institute of Modern Japanese Studies on a benefaction supporting a professorship, 2 university lectureships, and an instructorship has strengthened the subject immeasurably, so that it is clearly guaranteed at Oxford for the foreseeable future, even though the resources of the Institute are outside the faculty and almost entirely non-linguistic. Furthermore, it is possible that the establishment of the Institute may further deplete student numbers at Cambridge. On the other hand, although the pattern of retirements at Cambridge, recent developments at Oxford, and the possibility of even fewer undergraduates must put into question the continuation of Japanese studies at Cambridge, its strength in classical Japanese is unique in the United Kingdom, and it has, in the university library, probably the largest single Japanese library collection in Western Europe. That includes Sato's books there, of course. Moreover, Chinese would be weakened and its credibility diminished outside the university without the support of Japanese, which is an essential research tool for Chinese scholars. The termination of Cambridge Japanese would undoubtedly dismay senior academics in Japan and would also be at odds with other international influences and trends. In the present financial circumstances, however, the board feels obliged to accept the view of the Joint Working Party that the Cambridge Japanese course could be maintained adequately with an establishment of 2 university lectureships and a lectorship. The board accordingly propose the suppression of one of the vacant university lectureships, and they intend, subject to the approval of that proposal, to give permission to fill the remaining vacancy. They look to the faculty board, however, to review the working of the proposed new arrangements and to inform the board accordingly. And that was published in the Cambridge University Reporter, 16th of March, 1983, page 396, according to that footnote number 8. These recommendations were accepted. Charles Sheldon's post was suppressed, and the other, held by Douglas Mills, was advertised. At this point, October 1983, the balance had shifted markedly in Oxford's favour. Cambridge had only 2 active posts, 1 university lectureship, Carmen Blacker, and 1 lectorship, Haruko Lori. Despite the stated view of the Joint Working Party that the Cambridge Japanese course could be maintained adequately with an establishment of 2 university lectureships and a lectorship, this was clearly not a realistic proposition in the longer term, and there was a distinct possibility that Japanese studies would collapse when Carmen Blacker herself reached the retirement age. Carmen Blacker, who was much concerned about the threat to Japanese at Cambridge, drew the attention of Sir Hugh Kornitski, then British ambassador in Tokyo, to the seriousness of the matter and asked for any help he could give. I think he was ambassador 1980 to 1984. He decided that efforts must be made to try and raise money in Japan for the endowment of a chair and save Cambridge Japanese. He accordingly raised this with the Asahi Shimbun newspaper on the 29th of April 1983. This brought a response on 14th of May, and the next day the famous column Tensei Jingo took up the subject. By the end of that year, and as the result of much work by many people, a benefaction for a chair of modern Japanese studies was received from the Keidan Ren. The then chairman of the Keidan Ren, Hiraiwa Gaishi, was a prime mover, and it is known that TEPCO, the Tokyo Electric Power Company, was by far the largest donor. The chair was established at the end of July 1984 and advertised in October. Okay, so the Keidan Ren is the Japanese equivalent of the CBI, the Confederation of British Industry, I think. Right. In the meantime, the vacant lectureship was eventually advertised in December 1983. Richard Bowring, who had already published books on Mori Ogai and the Diary of Murasaki Shikibu, was appointed and returned from Princeton to take up the appointment on the 1st of June 1984. By that time, it was clear that the Keidan Ren benefaction had been promised and that the prospects for Japanese studies at Cambridge looked rosier than they had done a year earlier. In a separate but related development, work had been proceeding on another front. The Japan Foundation had been concerned that Japanese studies might disappear at Cambridge, and in collaboration with St. John's College, they eventually agreed to part-fund a senior studentship for 3 years with teaching duties in the faculty. Japan Foundation is, I believe, a Japanese government body with office in London, Russell Square. David McMullen, a lecturer in Chinese and fellow of St. John's, was particularly active in ensuring the success of this particular subvention. This post was advertised, and filled in October 1984 by Peter Kornitski, who was at that time a researcher at the Jinbun Kagaku Kenkyujo in Kyoto, the first foreigner to hold an established position at this kind of Japanese state institution. Oops, we have this footnote number 9, I think relates to Professor Bowring's published books. Yes, I think it's the titles. Let's have a look. Mori Ogai and the Modernization of Japanese Culture, 1979, and Murasaki Shikibu, Her Diary and Poetic Memoirs, A Translation and Study, 1982. All right, on to the next page, page 80. Carmen Blacker decided not to apply for the newly established chair in Japanese at Cambridge, although she was well qualified for the post. It was instead offered to Richard Bowring. On 19th February 1985, he was duly appointed to the chair, and the lectureship, which he had held, immediately became vacant. It was offered to Peter Kornitski in April 1985. This, in turn, left the senior studentship open, and both the Japan Foundation and St. John's College generously agreed to fund this post as of new for a full 3 years. Oops. It was filled soon afterwards by Mito Takamichi, a PhD student from Toronto, working on Japanese oil policy and international relations. It was his job to begin to fill the gap in modern studies, and he did this by starting a course in Japanese politics. By spring 1985, therefore, the situation had been transformed. The establishment had suddenly grown from 2 to 5, and Eric Kiedel's dream of creating a substantial center for Japanese studies was beginning to look achievable. The lure of benefaction led in 1985 to the university being almost taken in by a Japanese Walter Mitty-type fraudster who went under the name of IJUIN KIMITAKE. As this episode is marginal to the theme of this article, but is indicative of the problems of fundraising, the story has been consigned to a footnote. And here is the footnote number 10. Ah, it's quite a long footnote. Gosh. Footnote number 10. In the spring of 1985, someone calling himself Dr. IJUIN KIMITAKE, introduced by a scholar of English theatre from Waseda University, visited us. Dr. IJUIN announced that he was on a hush-hush private mission from Prime Minister Nakasone. The Japanese embassy would not know of his visit because it had been arranged by the PM's private office. He would be obliged if we did not contact the embassy to avoid embarrassment. Things were a little delicate, he explained. As everyone knew, Japan was worried at the size of its trade imbalance with Europe and the United States. Plans were afoot to set up a major Japan Studies Institute in Kyoto. This eventually came to fruition as the Nichibunken, and he had been sent to inquire what could be done about setting up a similar institute in Cambridge. He handed us a 4-page proposal for a Euro-Japan Institute of Cambridge, which would involve purchasing land in the city. The proposal was in English. He had already had a meeting with the university treasurer, who had, perhaps unwisely, revealed the existence of a suitable site in the city. It turned out he was referring to the empty shell of the old city hospital known as the old Addenbrooke's site, which eventually became the Judge Institute of Business Studies. A meeting with the Vice-Chancellor had also been set up. We were duly impressed. Dr. IJUIN produced a description of his own Japanese Cultural Arts Institute, Getsuritsuyo, in Yamanashi Prefecture, in which he described himself as pottery master, author, international lecturer, and mathematician. In conversation, it turned out that he had studied at Princeton, knew Marius Jansen there, and had a PhD from Dallas. Having passed him my card at the very beginning of the proceedings, I now asked him for his. After some hesitation, ii daro. Well, I suppose it's safe, he said quietly. He gave me his card. Does this continue on the next page? I suppose it might do. Yes. At the time, I was a little taken aback, but assumed that the secrecy of his mission meant that he had to be careful about handing his card to all and sundry at this stage. Soon after he left, we began to have second thoughts. A number of things did not quite add up. His name card was a very individualistic one. It had panache, but carried no information apart from the name and address in Yamanashi, not quite the kind of thing one expected from someone connected to the PM's office. Prime Minister's office. And then there was the matter of the name. It was a curious mixture. IJUIN was an aristocratic name from Kyushu, but Kimitake, his personal name, was the same as the real personal name of the Japanese author and suicide Mishima Yukio. He had been at Princeton but had relied on an interpreter. Most curious of all, he had combined a sober suit and tie with brown leather cowboy boots. Well, I thought this may be what special envoys from Nakasone were wearing these days, but I doubted it. I rang the embassy. No, they said. They did not know of an IJUIN, but they would check and get back. Meanwhile, the meeting with the Vice-Chancellor went ahead. All the top university officers were present. The plan to buy land and put up a large institute was presented. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. I told the Vice-Chancellor of my concerns at the end of the meeting, and we agreed to wait and see what happened. The embassy rang later that week to say that they had no knowledge of IJUIN but were still checking. I had the opportunity to discuss things with Professor Marius Jansen from Princeton, who was on a short visit to Cambridge University Press, and he confirmed that he knew IJUIN but not as a student. IJUIN had approached him in similar circumstances, and mention had also been made of a similar institute in the States. He had even visited IJUIN's mansion in Yamanashi. I heard nothing for a week, and then came a call from Interpol. Could they come and discuss a recent Japanese visitor, please? Apparently he was wanted in Tokyo on fraud charges. The tale that eventually emerged told of the power of personal introductions, the ways in which Japanese institutions can be manipulated, and of the kind of atmosphere that sudden richness in Japan had generated. It also said something about the reputation of Nakasone, in that the whole yarn of being a personal emissary had seemed so plausible. In the end, it was a sad story, but one had to admire the genius of a man who could pass himself off in front of the Vice-Chancellor without batting an eyelid. It turned out that IJUIN, also known as Kido Kazuo, Sakata Kazuo, Sakata Kimitake, was the eldest son of a Kyushu miner. Born in 1937, he had dropped out of high school, gone to work at the US base at Ashiya, that's very close to where I live, and picked up English. He returned home in 1962, just when the mines at Kaijima were closed. Borrowing his father's golden handshake, he married and went to America for his honeymoon. He was divorced in 1967. Off to America again, where he eventually ended up in jail for 3 years for fraud and embezzlement. Released in 1971, he returned to Japan. Going to see a famous hagi potter called Sakata, he asked to be taken on as an apprentice. When this failed, he approached and eventually married the daughter. They had 3 children, but he was again divorced in 1981. How he had cooked up the idea of becoming a Nakasone envoy, I do not know, but it was a touch of genius. What did he hope to get out of it from Cambridge? A letter signed by the Vice-Chancellor, perhaps? Or was it just the thrill of fooling the whole world and his brother? While he was acting his new role in Cambridge, and he tried Oxford the next month, things were quickly unraveling in Tokyo. On the 26th of May 1985, the Sankei Shimbun newspaper revealed that the upmarket Tokyo department store, Wako, had begun to recall all pottery sold at a one-man exhibition held 3 years previously. The potter's name was one IJUIN Kimitake. About 80 pieces had been sold at an average of 200,000 yen a piece. It had recently come to light that some of the pieces were by a rank amateur and had been exhibited without his knowledge. It turned out that IJUIN had managed to pass himself... Okay. Next page. Off as a master potter, had persuaded Wako to hold an exhibition of his work and had made a tidy profit from the proceeds. Takashimaya and Daimaru, 2 of Tokyo's largest department stores, had also been taken in and run similar exhibitions. The fraud only came to light when an amateur potter in Okayama called Ito, who had never sold a piece in his life, just happened to see some of his own pieces in the catalogue of the Wako exhibition. Oh, Lord. He then recalled that IJUIN had visited him some years back saying that he was in politics but was getting fed up with the rat race and wanted to study as a potter. Could he please have some advice as to how to begin as an amateur, and could he please borrow some pieces as examples? It was these examples that eventually ended up in the Wako exhibition. A year later, I heard that our friend IJUIN had been arrested at Narita and was now serving yet another sentence for fraud. Red faces all round. Okay, I think that's the end of the footnote. It seems like it anyway, even if it isn't. All right, let's go back. Yes. Back to page 80. Okay, so now we're going on to page 81. Gosh, it's tricky. What's going on here? I need to... It's because of the size of the footnote that I'm a little bit... Because of the size of the footnote, it takes up the whole of page 81. So we've now read page 81. All right, so I suppose that looks like we're going on to the next section of this. Yeah. Yes, I've never seen a footnote of this length before. Interesting. Okay, starting or continuing, I should say, from page 82. The recent past. The years from 1985 to 1995 brought steady expansion based on a successful search for funding outside the university. Starting in the summer of 1985, fundraising approaches were made via former students working in the City of London, primarily in merchant banks. Miss Haruko Fukuda, then working at James Capel and Company, and Patrick Gifford of Robert Fleming were central figures in raising this fund. They wanted to raise the money from British rather than Japanese institutions. James Capel and Robert Fleming gave substantial amounts, and other British instructions helped. But the British response was disappointing, and Haruko Fukuda and Patrick Gifford had to seek help from Japanese financial institutions to ensure that a sufficient fund was provided. In all, £350,000 was subscribed, including contributions from major Japanese financial houses. This allowed the creation of another language teaching post known as an instructorship, to which Haruko Lori was appointed in 1987. At the same time, the results of the Parker Report, entitled Speaking for the Future, a review of the requirements of diplomacy and commerce for Asian and African languages and area studies, commissioned by the then University Grants Committee, gave Cambridge a future lectureship in Japanese. The modern historian Stephen Large, who passed away recently, I'm sad to say, who moved from a readership in history at Adelaide to start teaching in October 1987, filled this post. He had already published The Rise of Labour in Japan, the Ui Kai, 1912 to 1972, and Organised Workers and Socialist Politics in Interwar Japan, 1981, and was later to make a major contribution with Emperor Hirohito and Showa Japan, a political biography, 1992. And at the bottom of this page is the end of that very long footnote, so it really does go on. Page 83. In 1988, Mr. Mito left Cambridge to take up a position in banking in London. By October 1988, the teaching strength was up to 6, with one additional unexpected bonus. Gina Barnes, who had previously been an assistant lecturer in the Department of Archaeology, won a senior studentship at St. John's College to continue her research and teaching. Dr. Barnes was uniquely a specialist in Japanese and Korean archaeology, and Cambridge had the benefit of her presence, her research, and her teaching until she left in 1996 to become Professor of Japanese at Durham. 1988 also brought a personal benefaction from the Japanese educationalist Kawashima Hiroshi, which allowed the university to create one more lectureship, to which Mark Morris was appointed in April 1989. He was well known for a series of seminal articles in the Harvard Journal of Asiatic Studies. Seminal means influential, yeah. Carmen Blacker was due to retire in 1991, but permission was obtained to fill the prospective vacancy well in advance, and Hugh Whitaker, now a professor at Oxford and the author of many books on the sociology of Japan, was appointed in August 1989. The following year saw the establishment of the Fuji Bank Lectureship in Modern Japanese Studies, which was first filled by Barry Keane, is that? Keehn. Or is it Kane? And is now held by John Nilsson Wright, who has written Unequal Allies, United States Security and Alliance Policy Towards Japan, 1945 to 1960, published 1998. At the same time, the balance in the first fund raised increased to the point where it was possible to think about improving the position of Haruko Lori as the person in charge of language teaching. The treatment of language teachers in universities has always been problematic. Dedicated born language teachers are not always born researchers, and so tend to become trapped in positions that do not reflect their worth to the university. Eventually, after much consultation and many committees, Bowring finally succeeded in persuading the university that it made sense to establish a post entitled Senior Language Teaching Officer that would attract a stipend that would more truly reflect the contribution made, while treating any research done by the officer to be an added bonus rather than a requirement. Haruko Lori was appointed to this new post in October 1991. Further benefactions were received from, among others, Yasuda Trust and Banking for a 5-year research fellowship in the, page 84, in the faculty. The Daiwa Anglo-Japanese Foundation for a 5-year research fellowship at Downing College, Mitsui Kaijo Kasai for a microfilm collection of all printed books from the Meiji period held in the National Diet Library, and Mr. Aoi Tadao of Marui Company Limited. This last gift of £3 million allowed us to build a new wing on the university library to house Japanese, Chinese, and Korean resources, together with an East Asian reading and reference room. I have been there once. It's very nice. Student numbers at Cambridge have always been sensitive to developments in the countries in question. They rose dramatically at first in line with the Japanese economy and then fell again when the Japanese bubble burst. The average has been fairly constant at 10 to 15 per year. Given the rise of China, interest in Japan might have declined further had it not been for Japanese pop culture, manga and anime, which have kept things in Japanese in the forefront of the minds of school children. Whether a fascination with anime can carry one through the rigors of actually learning how to read Japanese is another matter. Indeed. The situation today. Richard Bowring retired in 2012, not long after publishing The Religious Traditions of Japan, 500 to 1600, published 2008, and was replaced by Peter Kornitski, who had published the book in Japan in 1998. He, in turn, retired in 2014, and the third professor of Japanese at Cambridge, Mikael Adolfsson, took up the post in January 2016. He is the author of The Gates of Power, Monks, Courtiers and Warriors in Pre-Modern Japan, 2000, and The Teeth and Claws of the Buddha, Monastic Warriors and Sohei in Japanese History, 2007, amongst other works, and brings expertise on Japanese medieval history to Cambridge for the first time. Following the retirement of Haruko Lori, who had produced a valuable new textbook, An Introduction to Modern Japanese, in 2 volumes in 1993, and of Mark Morris, who had published both on Japanese literature and Korean cinema in 2015, several new appointments were made. In addition to Professor Adolfsson and John Nilsson Wright, the current members of staff are Toshimi Bolding, who teaches language, Miki Kawabata, who is Haruko Lori's replacement as Senior Language Teaching Officer, Barack Kushner, who is the author of The Thought War, Japanese Imperial Propaganda, published 2006, and Men to Devils, Devils to Men, Japanese War Crimes and Chinese Justice, 2015. Laura Moretti, who is the author of a large number of articles in English and Japanese on Edo period literature, Matthew Shawes, who works on pre-modern Japanese literature and is also a rakugo performer, and Brigitte Steger, who has written 世界が認めた日本の居眠り、通勤電車の弟にも意味があった。The world has recognized Japanese inemuri. There was a meaning in napping on commuter trains. 2013, and Japan copes with calamity. Ethnographies of the earthquake, tsunami, and nuclear disasters of March 2011, published 2015, edited with Tom Gill and David Slater. With student interest at its present level, any further expansion of Japanese studies at Cambridge will have to be via endowment, but the 20-year deflation and stagnation in Japan are not propitious. The result is a steady state, but at a less than desirable level. Perhaps the greatest problem that faces the subject in Cambridge is its continued isolation within the broader university. Thanks to the Nissan benefaction, Oxford has managed to create Japan-related posts in politics, social sciences, history, and economics. Cambridge has a strong central core, but lacks this further presence in other larger faculties, which restricts the subject from growing. It is here where comparisons with the United States are so stark. It would be rare to find a major US university where there were only 6 academics working on Japanese subjects. The other area in need of improvement is postgraduate studies. The superb resources of the University Library at Cambridge remain underused. Not enough funding is available to support graduates who increasingly gravitate towards the United States, where the subject is far better resourced at this level. This has 2 knock-on effects. A vibrant community of graduate students can make a big difference to a subject, and there are signs that the next generation of lecturers will be coming from outside the UK. It is a good sign that we can still attract such people, but the matter is surely serious when there are no UK applicants for jobs when they do become available. The University Library has a good collection of books relating to Japan. If the funding problems can be solved, we are confident that good graduates will be attracted by its treasures and its resources, which are all available on OpenStack. The first Japanese book arrived in the library in 1715. It took 233 years for the subject itself to be taught. That would appear to be the end of the chapter. I don't think there are any footnotes at the bottom of this page. I'll just quickly check. I see nothing there. And yes, the next chapter is by Koyama Noboru, Japanese Library Collections, Cambridge and Elsewhere. And I hope to be able to read that one because I know Koyama-san very well, and I've translated 2 of his books. All right, I think I'm going to stop the share here. Done. So we're back in Cambridge, as you can see. Thank you for persevering up to this point. I think at one point I got slightly confused about where the PDF was continuing. It sometimes happens with PDFs. It's not the same as reading a pages in a book where you know exactly where you are. But anyway, it's all grist to the mill of experience, and I look forward to seeing you again some point in the near future. Thank you very much indeed. Bye now.